Is there anything as exciting as looking forward to a great new game that's coming out? The thrill of checking out the latest trailers or new releases, or even going dark for the games you really want to go into blind like I do for the biggest games I'm looking forward to. But what about those times when all your hype and excitement gets completely deflated after popping in the game and finally playing it? There's nothing worse than having all that pent-up anticipation for a new release, sometimes for months or even years, only for it to betray your hopes and dreams and suck instead. Today I'll be counting down my top 10 most disappointing games of all time. Be sure to tell me some of your great stories of disappointment in the comments below, and if you enjoy these videos, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn notifications to all. Now let's begin.
Number 10.
Star Trek fans have been wanting a Mass Effect style Star Trek game ever since the original Mass Effect first came out on the Xbox 360. So when Star Trek for PS3 and 360 was announced, we were all in. The trailers made it seem like it was exactly what we had been waiting for, but then the reviews came in and showed the terrible janky gameplay and the god-awful writing. The game overall could have made for a half-decently fun, unoffensive, mindless third-person shooter, but the entire game feels rushed and unfinished. The plot speeds along and does not feel like something you'd expect from Star Trek. I understand that the Kelvin Timeline movies focus more on action, but this is just a typical third-person shooter where your weapons do little to no damage. Is there anything more annoying than padded out enemies? You can play the game co-op if you're down for subjecting a friend to this nonsense as well, and you do get to face off with the Kelvin Timeline's version of the Gorn. But overall, this game, with all of its bugs and glitches, was a huge disappointment to Star Trek fans. Just make a damn Star Trek Mass Effect game already! It's not the worst game on the list, but for crushing our dreams of a great story-driven Star Trek game, it deserves its spot at number 10.
Number 9.
I grew up in watching Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. For a while, most of the games were only released in Japan, so for great fighting games like Hyperdimension and JRPGs like Super Saiyan Densetsu, I had to play on an emulator years after they were released. But in the PS2 era, we finally started getting some decent Dragon Ball games like the Budokai and Tenkaichi fighting games. So when they announced a Dragon Ball Z 3D co-op beat-em-up game for the PS2, I was hyped. Finally, a great Dragon Ball game I could play with my friends instead of against them. I still remember the day I got home and popped Dragon Ball Z Sagas in. The first stage was god-awful, but I still had hope. It wasn't until about the third or fourth stage that it began to set in. This was gonna be the entire game, wasn't it? The game controlled like garbage, and the moves, characters, and overall graphics were just terrible. You can't even fly by choice, and when you can fly, it's only at a set height. Dragon Ball Z Sagas broke my teenage heart, and I will never forgive it. Thankfully, by this point, I knew better than to subject my friends to this torture, so I have never actually played this game co-op to this very day.
Number 8.
Anyone who had played the incredible beat-em-up Alien vs. Predator in the arcade was just watering at the mouth to play the home console version on the Super Nintendo. You couldn't wait to team up with your friends and play as the Marines or Predators and kick some alien ass. Unfortunately, the Super Nintendo game looks and plays more like a bad Game Gear game. The story seems cool, as does the intro cutscene, but it's all downhill from there. You press start and are forced to play as a single Predator without any multiplayer option at all. Your character basically takes up half the screen, and the controls are some of the stiffest and clunkiest I've ever experienced. The entire game consists of pretty much walking in a straight line, punching a few times, waiting, punching some more, then walking in a straight line again. Compare this to the exciting and action-packed arcade version, and you've got yourself one of the biggest recipes for disappointment. How could they have butchered this game so bad on home console? TMNT 2 on the NES was a great arcade port, and that was on the freaking NES! The Super Nintendo could do so much better than this mess, and for that, Alien vs. Predator on the Super Nintendo belongs at the 8th place on the list.
Number 7.
When No Man's Sky was announced, the creator of the game kept going on and on about how you and your friends could explore a vast, unending universe of planets and species. My hype for this game was off the charts, and I began telling people around me how we needed to get it so we can team up and explore the universe, discovering and claiming our own creatures and planets. When I got home and fired the game up, I was greeted to a fancy Minecraft-like game with some space simulation. Not only that, but shortly after release, people began to realize that you could be in the exact same place as your friends and they would never show up in your game. The amount of lies and exaggeration that was stated to boost the excitement for this game had all come crashing down immediately after it was released. Thankfully, after calling PlayStation and explaining that the game was almost nothing as advertised, I was able to get refunded the full amount and move on with my day. No Man's Sky may be a great game now with all the changes and updates, but back on release, this game had burnt fans bad. For crushing the plans I had for the coming weeks of playing what should have been an incredible interplanetary adventure with my friends, No Man's Sky landed at 7th on the list.
Number 6.
For people who know me, this entry won't be much of a shock. I've been a massive Pokemon fan since Pokemon Blue back on the original Game Boy. I loved Blue, and Silver was even better. But when Ruby and Sapphire came out, I bailed on the series for a time due to multiple different reasons. One of which being the fact that I couldn't bring my Pokemon from Gens 1 and 2 forward into the 3rd generation. It wasn't until the remake Soul Silver came out on the DS that I got back into the franchise again and quickly began to regain all my lost Pokemon from the first 2 games. Over the years, I've been able to have a completed living national Pokédex all the way up to Sun and Moon. Well, except for this douchey Anchor Pokemon. When they announced that they were finally going to be making mainline Pokemon games for the Switch, a system that doubles as a handheld and a home console, I was incredibly excited. That is until we got the news that not only would the game only have about 400 of the now 900 or so Pokemon, but that if the Pokemon isn't catchable in the games, you will not be able to transfer your Pokemon forward. It was Gen 3 all over again. This on top of the fact that Pokemon Sword Shield and Scarlett Johansson are riddled with bugs and jank, crushed my hopes and desires to play them at all. I feel like the Pokemon Company has been putting in the least amount of effort, knowing that their fans are just going to buy anything they release at this point. Here's hoping we can get a game soon that rectifies all the negative changes, whilst keeping all the great new additions to the series.
Number 5.
I love Kirby games almost as I love Castlevania games, so when I found out they made a Metroidvania-style Kirby game on the Game Boy Advance, I was ecstatic. Kirby and the Amazing Mirror is what happens when you've got a ton of great ideas, but have no clue how to properly execute them. Without having a proper central map, and having a lot of the areas be small enclosed tunnels with no real sense of direction or means of even figuring out where to go, it immediately killed any desire I had to progress in this game. It's a real shame too, because the gameplay itself is tight, and the graphics are top-notch for a Game Boy Advance game. For somehow ruining what could have been an awesome and exciting clash of game styles, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror is stuck here at number 5 on the list.
Number 4.
As a huge Final Fantasy and Chocobo Racing fan, I was super excited to play a new Final Fantasy themed Chocobo Racing game on the Switch. Chocobo GP looked fantastic graphically, and had a ton of my favorite Final Fantasy characters, with more promise to come. My friends and I were all patiently awaiting for the game's release, but immediately afterwards regretted our decision to buy it. Instead of a solid kart racer with our favorite Final Fantasy characters, we were being sold a games as a service platform where in order to unlock new characters and gain an advantage in races, you had to race people an ungodly amount of times online or pay multiple fees. Even the cringe-inducing main menu theme was enough to throw this game in the trash where it belongs. The gameplay was also much worse than its PS1 original, proving that they were just wanting to rush this game out for an easy cash grab. Square Enix has been dropping a massive load of shit all over its loyal fans lately, trying to squeeze every last penny out of them with as little effort as possible, and Chocobo GP is unfortunately a product of that mindset.
Number 3.
Sega messed up pretty bad when they released Sonic 06 on the PS3, but we knew from the moment we saw it that it was going to be a heaping pile of trash. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said about Sonic the Hedgehog 4. Sonic 4 had promised to take us back to the 2D retro heyday of the Blue Blur's Genesis days. From a lot of the early trailers, it looked like they may have pulled it off too. A classic Sonic game with a crisp modern HD look. What could possibly go wrong? Well, the answer to that is almost everything. Sonic 4 played nothing like the classics it was pretending to pay tribute to. Not only that, but when I forced myself through and got to the end of the game, all I got was a to be continued in part 2 ending. The game had only 4 zones, most of which were just terrible remakes of previous Sonic stages. There are a ton of fan games that had a lot more love and care put into them, one of which is an official Sonic title that came out a few years after Sonic 4 left its shit smear across the franchise. but for tarnishing our hopes for a great classic-styled Sonic game for a period of time and splitting the experience in two, Sonic 4 blasts into the number 3 position.
Number 2.
Lunar 1 and 2 Complete are some of the greatest games not only on the Sega CD and PlayStation 1, but of all time. When I found out there was a third mainline game made for the DS, I immediately had to check it out. Unfortunately for myself and any other Lunar or even JRPG fan, Lunar Dragon Song is complete garbage. The game's visuals carry none of the charming art style the originals were known for, the writing is bland, but most importantly are the terrible game mechanics. In Lunar Dragon Song, not only do your weapons break over time, but after each battle, you have to choose whether you want gold or EXP. That's right, you can't just grind for both. You of course need EXP to get stronger, but without any gold, your weapons will break, and you'll have nothing to replace them with. Whoever designed this game needs to be kneed in the face. How can you take such a great and beloved franchise and run it completely into the ground with an awful sequel like this? Since Dragon Song, there hasn't been a new Lunar game besides the remake of the first game on the PSP and mobile. For straight up murdering an incredible and classic JRPG franchise, Lunar Dragon Song earned its place near the top of the trash pile at number 2.
Number 1.
As a lifelong Gundam fan, there are a number of good and bad Gundam games I've played over the years. One of the most fun and innovative series was the Gundam Breaker series. In Gundam Breaker, you build your own Gunpla or Gundam-themed mobile suit models and control them in battle. As you beat down all the different enemies, you break off their parts and can then add them to your customized mobile suit, giving it a fully customized look and stats. After importing and loving the first 3 games, I was super excited when they finally released New Gundam Breaker. Not only was this game going to be a great new entry in the Gundam Breaker franchise, it was also going to be the first game to be released outside of Japan and had a worldwide release date. I remember my friends and I pre-ordering this bad boy only to get home and find out that it was basically a terrible anime high school themed visual novel that played nothing like the first 3 games. I remember calling my buddy Mike and playing it while chatting in Discord. As the night went on, we kept trying to enjoy the game, but slowly had to come to terms with the fact that we weren't having any fun at all. For pulling the big con and tricking longtime Gundam fans into buying this heap of ass, and also making my friends and I very hesitant on pre-ordering games moving forward, New Gundam Breaker deserves its place at number 1. There is no reason this game should have been bad. All they had to do was remake Gundam Breaker 1, 2, or 3 and add some new content, and we would have been more than happy. But to promise a new entry in the Gundam Breaker franchise and then release something completely different, these guys fucked us hard. Thanks for watching. Please tell me some of your disappointment horror stories down in the comments below. And if you're on Twitch, come hang out with me at least 3 nights per week at twitch.tv/Dookie03. I'll see you guys in the next one.